Good morning, everyone. Jack Stockwell here for Global Affairs Unfiltered. I am just carrying on this incredible relationship, and I don't know. I don't know if my show's been sabotaged or what. What is this? Nothing's coming across. Oh, oh. Let's see if I can't call in now. Hold on, just I'll be right with you. I'll be right with you. All right. Now, I don't know. Maybe I am simulcasting along with, maybe there's two signals coming across. So anyway, I'm gonna a lot of stuff. We'll start off with the peace conference that's supposed to be going on in Riyadh. That gives a lot of hope for the planet. Um, this is crazy. This is so crazy. I have no control of what is going on in the background. So if we have two signals coming through, I need you to tell me. And if we do, then I'm going to turn off. I will turn off the radio station again as of yesterday until this problem is corrected. And I can't. All right, I might have jumped on the stream a little fast. Give me a second here, maybe a couple of more minutes to see if this thing plays out. Then if the other news comes back on, I might be done with K Talk. Not much. I've tried to get a hold of Paul. I can't reach him this morning. I don't blame him. He probably doesn't want to answer the phones for fear of how bad things are right now. I don't know. This could be the final days of K Talk. I don't know what happened during the day yesterday, but if they were plagued with the same problems that I was plagued with, I'm sitting here looking at the control station here on the internet for K Talk, waiting for this to come to an end here. This is so embarrassing. I don't know how to put this on hold, but there aren't a whole lot of you there on the stream right now. So this only is a testimony to how much abuse I can put up with. Well, 30 years. What is this? This is the 18th. Another 3 weeks, 2 weeks will be my 30th anniversary at K Talk Radio. There was a little hiatus there for a couple of years, but when I went straight to podcasting. But I came back in May of 2018, which will be, 7 years. I've been back on again for, I can't believe that. Another 7 years. All right, let's see what's going to happen here. I am connected to the station at K Talk. Maybe I better be careful what I'm saying. What do you think? There. Now I muted myself, but I'm not getting any messages from anybody of simulcast or double broadcasting or whatever, two feeds. All right, here. Could this be it? No. All right, wait for this commercial. And then if the thing still is playing in the background, I absolutely don't know what else to do. All right. I got my stream mic here in front of me now. I'm just waiting for this commercial to finish. I may have jumped on the stream here a little too early. I've got plenty to talk to you about. Just, now, I don't see me coming through. That's the problem. There was a break there. I don't know how to show you what I'm looking at so you can appreciate this. Don't just another minute, and then I'll get going. If K-Talk's not up and operating, then I'll get going. I don't know, maybe it's my anti-Zionist opinions. Great, old-time radio shows, we love that. Let's get on, let's get moving here. Oh, what a day I had yesterday. I've got a big conference at the end of next weekend. All right, now, there doesn't seem to be any way of turning that off. This is crazy. All right. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any indication whatsoever that I'm even broadcasting with this guy. Something was set up on a permanent basis. All right, that's it. All right, so I'm just going to go straight. I'm going to go straight to. So those of you joining the stream right now, I really appreciate it. I've got a lot of stuff to talk about. I think we can do the whole show. I cut it off early yesterday out of my passive aggressive nature. That somebody that's very, very dear to me says, "Why do you put up with that station?" Well, it's a good question. This person has tried to get me on other local talk shows in the Salt Lake area, and I've always felt a loyalty. I've always felt a loyalty to K-Talk. They got me started back in March of 1995. Story I'll have to tell you sometime how I not accidentally, but how that whole thing happened. All right, anyway, the U.S. and the Russian governments have both given the highest priority to today's meeting between the Russian and the U.S. officials in the capital of Saudi Arabia in Riyadh. And the U.S. Secretary, look who's showing up. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, the Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, who a couple of weeks ago put Netanyahu in his place. And they're going to sit down with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, probably the foremost statesperson on the face of the planet, statesman, and along with the Putin's foreign policy advisor, Yushakov. And for some what they call exploratory in-depth discussions the first serious discussion between the world's two super nuclear powers in 3 years, ever since Biden's last, after the special military operation, and Biden, well, I'm just going to take my ball and go home. Yeah, so neither Ukraine's, when you look at the power structure of who's there, you've got to ask yourself the question, who isn't there? Who did not get invited to this? And after listening to Hegseth in Munich and Vance in Paris, where the new rules that they're laying down, it should be no surprise that Zelensky was not invited, but even more so, no European officials will be present. And oh my gosh, has this set off a hornet's nest in Europe. So the Riyadh meeting follows rather quickly after the phone conversation, I guess it's about a week ago, maybe tomorrow, whatever, between President Trump and President Putin, initiated by President Trump, in which both the presidents expressed a commitment to restoring normal relations. And then less than a week later, was it 6 days later now, they're meeting in Riyadh. I don't know for sure why Riyadh, except Saudi has made peace proposals that are still in consideration for Gaza. So Witkoff told Fox News 2 days ago, Sunday, that he and Waltz will be, quote, having meetings at the direction of the president and hope to make some really good progress with regard to Russia, Ukraine, blah, 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 blah. So for her part, the State Department spokeswoman, Tammy Bruce, and now we can say spokeswoman, not spokesperson, told reporters that the aim of the meeting is to determine how serious Russia is about wanting peace in Ukraine and whether the detailed negotiations can be started. The goal, she said, was for everyone to determine if this is something that can move forward. In other words, how do you deal with a conquering army that can go further if they want to? Do you sit down with Lavrov and Yushakov and say things like, what are you willing to give up? Or do you sit down and start talking to people like this with the idea in mind, what do you absolutely have to have for this to stop? And since they've won the war is essentially over, of course, you know that. This should be no mystery or surprise to anybody. And since the war is essentially over with, what do the conquerors want? I mean, after Napoleon won at Austerlitz, did he make concessions? No. After that, he was ready to march into Moscow. Bad mistake. We've learned that from Napoleon. We've learned that from Hitler and anybody else that tries to march to Moscow, just as much as these Atacam missiles have tried to do and the drones have tried to do. It's just not going to work. So for his part, Lavrov cited the agreement between the two presidents to end the absolute abnormal period in their relationships. See, this isn't just about ending the war in Ukraine, it's repairing the relationships between Russia and the United States. And if you've been following some of the statements that Trump has been making, he wants to lift the sanctions. He wants trade deals. He wants to bring Russia back into the G8. And of course, this has got Europe just scrambling, scared to death. Some of the stupid comments that they're famous for have been outdone by more stupid comments coming out of their mouth. So Lavrov said, well, we're going to listen to our American counterparts. We'll be ready to respond. And we will report back to our leaders what these future steps might indicate. So the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, also characterized these discussions as focusing primarily on the entire complex of America-Russia relationships. He said it will also be devoted to a preparation of negotiations for a Ukraine settlement and the organization of a meeting between the two presidents that apparently may happen in as early as the next week, also in Saudi. So to a question from Tass about the possible real-time communication between Putin and Trump, Peskov said, there is an opportunity to do it either way. If any urgent reports are needed, then all communication opportunities are available. Now, Yushakov, whose comments were similar to Lavrov and Peskov on the expected scope of the meeting, told reporters that Kirill Dmitriev, who's head of the Russia Direct Investment Fund, might join in the discussions as well. So what does that mean when you're bringing in money? Very interesting. Several more things I want to cover. I want to talk about China in its, the UN Security Council is debating the United Nations' role in maintaining peace and security. This is really, really kind of interesting. You know, coming up here, is it May 6th, when it will mark the 80th anniversary of the victory of the World Anti-Fascist War and the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. A very important occasion to be commemorated and a historical juncture in taking stock of the past and looking forward to what you can expect from the future. So this high-level debate at China's initiative, because everybody knows that the UN Security Council is under the control primarily of the United States, because whatever they decide needs to be done worldwide on the basis of the United Nations, the United States usually will veto it if they don't like it, which kind of hamstrings the whole concept of the United Nations. And so the UN has been dedicated to try and to work around this terrible obstruction because of, well, there's almost 100 countries that are involved in, who are trying to get this done. There's over 95 million people who've been displaced, mostly in Africa, but other places. And especially in these developing countries that are moving towards BRICS. So you not only have the Ukrainian situation and the Gaza situation and the lunatic fringe expressions of European leaders, and then what's going on in the Taiwan Straits. There's all these other countries that know that whatever dangling position they have on the world scene will be in serious jeopardy if any of these war places break out to a larger degree. And I don't think it's going to happen in the Ukraine now, because we're not sending them any more money or bombs, which means they got, what, 2 to 3 weeks of armament left. As far as Gaza is concerned, the Arab League that's meeting right now, and they're discussing the possibility of turning the control of Gaza back over to a Palestinian control. And that Hamas is saying that they would take a back seat. All these things are going on. I don't know if this is just flutter to try and keep people on the edge of their seats, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to follow in the steps of Trump, who constantly throws out these outrageous comments all the time, throwing people off of his track. As I said yesterday in the short time that I was on the stream, I still believe in my heart of hearts Trump is playing chess here and has every intention of bringing what's going on in Israel to an end and what is going on in Ukraine to an end, and calming down things between China and Taiwan. Now, add to the mix, to show the lunacy of what's going on in Europe, the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, hoping to pressure not only the Europeans but also Donald Trump, just had an announcement, an article that came out the other night in the Telegraph, where he is willing to put British troops into Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping force to guarantee Ukraine's security. Starmer said this: Securing a lasting peace in Ukraine that safeguards its sovereignty for the long term is essential if we are to deter Putin from further aggression in the future. And then the article comes ahead of a Paris meeting, another one where the European leaders, where Starmer also is intended to talk up the alleged need for Europe to increase all of their defense spending. Well, yeah, after Trump says we're not going to spend anymore. And if they want to continue this ridiculous war to bring Russia to its knees, then they're going to have to pay for it, and they're going to have to provide the troops. And all I can see is that meeting, of course, is going on now. It may even be coming to an end in Riyadh, where they're looking at each other like, what are the hell these European leaders, what are they thinking? So Starmer says, the UK is ready to play a leading role in accelerating work on security guarantees for Ukraine. Being ready and willing to contribute to security guarantees to Ukraine by putting our own troops on the ground if necessary. He claimed he feels very deeply about sending British troops into harm's way, and you know what Putin has already said, what will happen to any foreign troops that show up in the Ukraine. They'll be gone as soon as we know they're there. We will destroy them as soon as we know they're there. As soon as we know where they're at, we will destroy them. Now, Starmer is saying, well, no, if we can get some kind of a ceasefire and some kind of a peace agreement going on, then we want to send in British troops in order to help maintain the security of the nation. I think if they can come to an agreement in Riyadh, clearly the offer of British troops to the Ukraine is really a part of trying to drag the United States further into the Ukraine in opposition to the statements of Hegseth and Vice President Vance. Vance said this last week, while European nations must step up in this moment, and we will, U.S. support will remain critical, and a U.S. security guarantee is essential for a lasting peace, because only the U.S. can deter Putin from attacking again. Then Starmer says, so I will be meeting President Trump in the coming days and working with him and all our G7 partners to help secure the strong deal we need. And then Trump said, well, I want Russia back into the G7 to make it back to the G8 that it used to be. So the Telegraph reported separately that a number 10 Downing Street insider, familiar with Starmer's thinking, said his decision to go public before the Paris meeting was in part a result of U.S. statements at the Munich Security Conference, when the U.S. administration figures made it clear that Europe would have to play a greater role in its own defense. So Lord Richard Dannatt, the former chief of the UK's defense staff, who just a couple of days ago demanded a massive increase in the UK military budget, responded to Starmer's op-ed by saying that while it's all well and good to send British troops to the UK doesn't have troops to send for a lasting peacekeeping mission. He said, my reaction is the Prime Minister's doing the right thing, but of course doing the right thing comes at a price. Frankly, we haven't got the numbers and we haven't got the equipment to put a large force on the ground for an extended period of time at the present moment. This is all great. So the G20 is being held in South Africa this week, the first time ever in Africa. And it's a very important year for all of this, of course, because it is the 80th anniversary of the victory of World War II, of Russia's victory in World War II. And a lot of people have a hard time understanding that. It wasn't the Allies that won the war, it was Russia that won the war. And the Allies helped, but it was Russia that won the war. All right, now, I think we're witnessing A very dramatic collapse right now of the Atlanticist-dominated transatlantic order. Ever since I started at K-Talk, as I was saying there at the beginning of this, 30 years ago, in about 3 weeks, the first Tuesday, it's either the first Monday or the first Tuesday of March, I was on the Kay Henry Show, talking about upper cervical neurology and what I do in my clinic. And it grew from there into a political show before a year was over with. And I have talked about the control of the planet coming out of the City of London ever since I started a political show at K-Talk. I went from a Saturday morning 1-hour program to Monday through Friday, 7 to 9. There were sometimes it was 6 to 9. 3 hours every morning was a little bit too much. And I have always labored the point that out of the Bank of England and its control over Wall Street and its control over the Fed, Federal Reserve, that they have pretty well been in control of what goes on around the planet in the sense of a unipolar world. And they had the American military to back them up, which is why the English military, the UK military has been waning less and less all the time, as has been pointed out more than once by Ritter and McGregor. The entire British Army couldn't fill an NFL stadium. Now, what's happening is the collapse of this thing that I've been talking about for 30 years. This transatlantic order that exists between the City of London, the Wall Street, and the Pentagon. It's falling apart. And so this, on the one side, a breath of fresh air, which was caused by Vice President Vance at the Munich Security Conference. But I think it would be totally premature that that's going to solve all the problems, because all it does is create an opening to put in the right conception, because there are landmines all over the place that could still go off at any time to derail this. But nevertheless, this Munich Security Conference definitely is correctly called by several people as a historic one already, but not because it created something historic, but because it may very well be at least the end of that kind of a format. Because the Munich Security Conference used to be very prestigious for dialogue among security experts. But it kind of went downhill after some strong German influence well, it is Munich, because it became a public relations site for the military-industrial complex on both sides of the Atlantic. And so during the Munich Peace Conference, Christoph Hegseth, who has been very much involved in German politics ever since Angela Merkel got in there. What was that, 2005, 2006, something like that. When he was making his concluding remarks at this conference, where Hegseth made it very clear Russia's not going to be giving up any territory, Hegseth burst into tears as in his closing remarks. It's unclear if he was crying over the fact that the transatlantic alliance was breaking apart. Could very well be that he's losing his job because now they want Stoltenberg to be the new leader of this security conference. But in any case, this poor Hegseth is a very fitting image to show the failure of the policies that were associated with that particular crowd of people who've pushed for this unipolar world with the American military behind it for decades. So I think the rift between Vance and and therefore the Trump administration, with the people who were collected there, most of them, because there were some guests. It's really symptomatic that the unipolar order, which was attempted after the end of the Cold War, that completely ended up in a blowback, leading to the emergence of BRICS. And as this new system is emerging, and now also this disunity among besties, the UK and the United States, not so good for the Allies in the first place. It never should have happened. It's quite significant. But if this new paradigm that is forming here of a new security and development architecture, which is what Trump has mentioned, Vance said it, Hegseth said it, Lavrov said it, Putin has said it, it's kind of inevitable that that's what came out of these speeches at the Munich conference. I think it's also symptomatic that immediately at the end of this conference, after they could not dissuade Hegseth, that Macron called for an emergency summit for the Europeans to gather in Paris, which is, I think it's happening today, or may already be happening. And, or it may already have happened. It was right after the end of this thing. And the summit opened, and it's quite interesting that not everybody was invited to this emergency conference in Paris. Macron invited Scholz. He invited the UK, Italy, Poland, Spain, the Netherlands, Denmark, the EU Commission President von der Leyen, the European Council President, and the NATO General Secretary Rudy. Who was not invited, again, this is, you always have to ask that question, was Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, obviously Slovakia's Fico, Luxembourg, Belgium, and obviously a coalition of the willing, because there are more and more people in the EU now who are not supporting taking the place of America's money and bombs in the Ukraine. They know the truth. They know that Russia has won this thing. Now, the bigger danger that can come out of all of this is what the British are doing. And as I said there in the Telegraph, Starmer announces that he's willing to put British troops on the ground in the Ukraine as a part of some peacekeeping force to guarantee Ukraine's security. Now, how do you guarantee security with a peacekeeping force that is made up of an army? What if they don't want to keep the peace? What if something happens to break the peace? As many people have been sitting on the edge of their seats waiting for phase 2 of this peace agreement in Israel to fall apart and regain the war with Hamas. Well, I think it's because Trump said that's not going to happen. You're going to continue this thing out. Now, Trump did say if not all of the hostages had been released by last Saturday, all hell would break loose. Well, not all the hostages have been released, and all hell hasn't broken loose. But I'll get to that in a minute. It's just that the UK is trying to play a leading role in securing these guarantees for Ukrainian safety. Now, obviously, this is what the British would like to do, and it's in total line with the sabotage of the peace process by Boris Johnson back in March of 2022. Boy, that was three years ago, when Russia and Ukraine were sitting down at the table to end the aggression. And Boris Johnson just flipped that table over. And now there's over 1 million casualties. You add up the Russians, you add up the massive Ukrainians, and then all of the innocents, and it's over 1 million casualties now. So when Johnson appears on the other side of the veil, he'll have that to account for, I think. But this puts the British position at complete odds with what Pete Hegseth and Vance were saying last week. And I think it's a very good opportunity to insist that this special relationship between the UK and the United States be cut in half and laid to death as soon as possible. And the special relationship, of course, called for, among other things, complete intelligence sharing between MI6 and the CIA. Now, obviously, if the British position, which is not very far from Macron and what he's trying to do, and not very far from the war hawks in Europe, who have invested heavily in the military-industrial complex, together are all trying to support how there should be a really huge military buildup in Europe and increased budget spending from these various countries for the military. You know, Trump had demanded that the Europeans was up there 5% of their GDP for the military. Obviously, given, and you can imagine, this is one of those perfect examples where the military-industrial complex doesn't care who's winning, just as long as the war continues. Obviously, given the fact that all these economies are collapsing, especially in Germany, and France not far behind, this is completely unrealistic. Now, did Trump know that when he said that they need to spend 5% of their GDP on military when their GDPs are crashing? A very top-level British figure, Lord Richard Dannatt, D-A-N-N-A-T-T, said that the British Army is in absolutely no position either in terms of personnel or equipment to fulfill such a job as peacekeeping in the UK. And the same goes for all the other European armies. And without a U.S. umbrella or U.S. involvement with the perspective that the U.S. is going to pull out a large number of troops from Germany, which may be relocated in Poland, but in any case, it's all in a disarray. And I think this militaristic outlook is, given all the other factors going on, just completely insane. Because the idea that Putin is planning to invade the Baltic countries or Poland after he's done with Ukraine only exists in the fantasy dreams of the war hawks in Europe, not backed by any reality whatsoever. And many people have actually said so, but there's no sign that many people have said that there's no sign of Putin even thinking of doing something like that, especially since there's no reason for the Russians to do that. The Russians don't want Ukraine. The Russians just wanted the murderous aggression against the Russian people in the eastern Ukraine to stop, and they wouldn't stop it. The super neo-right-wing conservative aspect of the Ukrainian population hate the Russians. And they have good reason. If you go back enough decades, back to the starvation of the Ukrainian people under Stalin, I mean, I can understand that. Just like there's people in the southern states, and you hear them occasionally, don't think the Civil War is over, that their day is coming. But there's no sign, and some of the leaders of Europe are saying there's no sign that Putin has any intention of taking. He doesn't want the Ukraine. He probably will not go past the Dnieper as long as the war stops. Now, he said he'll defend Belarus, and Poland is talking about invading Belarus. Belarus has an awful lot of Russian missiles in it right now. But the meeting that is, the emergency meeting that Macron called is taking place in Paris. We kind of have to, we won't know till later today, or may have already been announced on the news, I don't know. You know what, I don't need to be connected to K-Talk. Was I still connected to K-Talk? I don't need to be running down these batteries. So anyway, I think that the speech that J.D. Vance gave was, just like I said, a breath of fresh air. It greatly encourages me that there may yet be some sensibility expressed in the foreign policy of the United States. And a lot of what he said is absolutely to the point, namely that the real threat is not coming, and this is the thing, you know, that caused the people attending this conference to go, oh, put their hands over their mouth, duck their heads, look at each other like, did he really say that? when he said that the real threat is not Russia, it's not China, it's coming from within the European Union, and that the parties and the governments fear their own voters, and that they're suppressing the expression of free speech, and they're not inviting opposition parties, even if they have numbers in the parliament, both on the left and on the right, which is all fine and good, and hysteria on the side of the Atlanticists, like Norbert Röttgen of the CDU party behind Merz, and Zimmerman of the FDP, and all these people was absolutely gigantic. They were beside themselves with hysteria. But I think, to tell the truth, as Chaz Freeman, a regular guest on Napolitano, was very useful back on the last Friday in his discussion on Dialogue Works, where he says that it's good that what Vance said, that in Europe, but he said that one has to point to the fact that the Trump administration is taking action to silence anyone who speaks about Palestine or genocide, and that they're going after the universities, and that the main explainer of this policy was J.D. Vance. So that's something in the coming conventions that are going on, and some here in this country, because if you want to go for the truth, then go for the truth, but you can't have a double standard. You can't be preaching water out there and drinking wine, as they say. So on the one hand, Vance is saying, your problems are the citizens of your own country who don't like what you're doing, not Russia, not China. Well, the military-industrial complex doesn't want to hear that. But in any case, I can only express that Vice President Vance's speech was highly appreciated by a lot of people. And the demonstration against the Munich conference, where Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern had been making some comments, they loved Vance's speech, said it was very important. And Garaci said that the intervention by Vance and Trump is one thing, but they don't have a clear strategy, just what they're not going to do. And so you can expect more twists and turns, especially with the twisting, turning verbiage that comes out of Trump's mouth. And that the EU under von der Leyen right now is just a complete bubble in which the EU leaders like what they hear when they hear what they're saying themselves. But the citizens that they answer to is just in a total uproar. The Hungarian government warned against the Paris meeting, saying that it was probably an effort, a combined effort on the countries that were attending to sabotage this Ukrainian peace solution. And he warned, he says, you've got to watch this closely. And now the other major topic is what is going to happen in the Middle East. Now, the ultimatum by Trump, which I said earlier, that for noon Saturday, all of the hostages were to be released or all hell would come down. Well, as I said, all hell did not come down. But Hamas indicated a willingness to proceed with the ceasefire, so they released 3 more hostages. And according to the Jerusalem Post, which, I believe Haaretz more than I believe the Jerusalem Post, because things are very much in motion right now. But the Jerusalem Post reported that Hamas is ready to turn over power in Gaza to the Palestinian National Authority, which would unify the West Bank and Gaza under Palestinian Authority for the very first time. And we have to, that's got to be verified, but this is very big. Why would Israel agree to such a thing? Now, that's not the end of the story, because it's in an extreme state of flux right now. But that came out of the Jerusalem Post just the other day. Now, also going on today is a very important conference taking place in Cairo, organized by the Egyptian government, supported by all the players, the Qatar, the Saudis, the Arab League, and others. And what they are presenting and discussing is the reconstruction plans for Gaza, with the Palestinian population remaining in Gaza while the reconstruction occurs. as compared to Trump's idea of kicking them out. So we have to see, I mean, this is part of the negotiation, and the meeting in Riyadh that's going on now will start where Vance is already there, and Lavrov, as I said, and Rubio's on his way there, and I'm not sure who, Witkoff, of course, is, I don't know who else in the American delegation might be there. But the situation, I mean, this is, you know, I really want to believe the best is coming of this. The things that I was so worried about a year ago leading up to the election and wanting to believe Trump's rhetoric in his campaigning, a lot of which he's carried out, but a lot of it is really, I mean, double standard. I mean, if he could do in Gaza what he's doing in the Ukraine, I would be a lot happier. But then I don't think he's through with Gaza. And so the meeting that's going on in Riyadh with Vance and Rubio and Lavrov and Yushakov, it could very well be that in the very short term, if these people in that meeting now, especially Vance and Rubio and Lavrov, can sit there and have a meeting of the minds where they come away from this conference going on today, this very day, February 18, with their heads up and their chins lifted and their chests full of air in the hope that they made some great progress. Very shortly thereafter, probably in the same location, or I don't think they're going to reveal the location because there's too many people that want to take Trump and Putin out. Be a great place for a drone, where Trump and Putin would be meeting in Riyadh as well. And if that happens, then the situation is, if Trump sits down with Putin and carries through with what Vance has been saying and Hegseth has been saying, NATO will not be in the Ukraine. Then the Europeans are just completely hysterical and will get more hysterical that there is a meeting between Putin and Trump. And they, as you see going on right now, will be excluded because in these preliminary peace talks with the U.S. delegation and the Russian delegation, Zelensky is not there, neither are the European leaders. And Zelensky is invited to go. I don't know if he's there, but there hasn't been any evidence that he showed up. But the Europeans are frantic that they're being left out. Now, why they're bringing in Zelensky, I guess, is just a figurehead because he has no authoritative power to speak on behalf of the Ukraine. He was out of office May of last year. Well, that's another thing that they will be demanding, is that elections start right away in the Ukraine for a new leader. And then there was, this is unconfirmed. I thought this was really interesting. And it's unconfirmed. Apparently there was a tweet in one of the social media by Caroline Leavitt, you know, the White House press secretary, where she put a message to Schultz, say, you know, after Schultz made his presentation in Munich. And apparently she said, and this has not been confirmed, Mr. Chancellor, watch out. The only place you have left is on the dock, meaning some kind of a court case or tribunal or whatever for the whole European situation. Now, it's unconfirmed. Obviously, if it's true, it just shows the state of affairs between the United States and Europe. Just think about that for a minute. The previous White House press secretary, Jean-Pierre, can you imagine her making a threat to Europe's chancellor? Now, the German elections are in another week, or maybe 2 weeks. I don't remember the exact date. Schultz will be out. Merz is probably going to get in. And Merz, of course, was a former, not enforcer, but way up the line representative of BlackRock for Europe. So you know what Merz's policies for the Ukraine are going to be. But another thing I was reading in relation to BlackRock, BlackRock wants to get control of the strategic minerals. And guess whose army is sitting on the strategic minerals in the Ukraine right now? Yeah, the Russian army. They're not going to give that up. So today, Wang Yi, the China's foreign minister, is going to be in New York before the UN Security Council, whereas I was saying here back before the beginning of the show, that the UN Security Council is trying to discuss the ontological meaning of their existence. What is our purpose of being here? And the word on the street is that he's going to be there pushing multilateralism, getting away from the unipolar world to a multipolar world. Steve Witkoff told Fox News on Sunday that the talks on phase 2 of the hostage release ceasefire deal is continuing, and that he has been on the phone with Netanyahu himself. He's been on the phone with the Qatari Prime Minister Al Thani. He's been on the phone with the Egyptian intelligence chief Rashad. He said they've all been productive and constructive, and that phase 2 contemplates the end of the war. And also Hamas being out. Now, Hamas is not going to be out because they lost. Hamas is backing up a little bit to continue the ceasefire, where the continuation of the Palestinians under a Palestinian Authority, combining both Gaza and West Bank for the first time ever, may take place. Hamas has said, okay, now we know where our guns are, we know where our rocket launchers are, we know where our tunnels are, but we'll try one more time to back off and let some peace reign for once. So both conferences, the Paris one that is going on today, and by today, here it's 8 o'clock, and Paris is what, 7 hours, 8 hours? I think 8 hours ahead of us. So here at 8 hours later is 4, so it's over with. I mean, they're probably planning on having dinner. But and the one in Cairo, Paris, Cairo's another hour or two ahead of them, are going to tell us an awful lot about how things are going to develop as the reports come out of these meetings. Now, otherwise, on topics related to that, what is going on in Germany right now, the CDU, which is probably going to win with Merz at the head of it, will try to form a government with those coming in second, the SPD party. It would still be a minority government, but the Greens will still have a hand in there. And interestingly enough, the Greens are very hawkish about the Ukraine. But to get a majority, which is a requirement to be elected chancellor, he's going to need more votes, either from the AfD, the Trumpers, which would put a shadow over his chancellorship because of the so-called firewall discussion. But this is the interesting thing about a parliamentarian government, as opposed to a constitutional government that we have. In some ways, a parliamentary government, I think, is more efficient than what we have. But by the same token, what we have is a lot more stable than a parliamentarian government. You can get things to happen quicker with a parliament than you can a House of Representatives and a Senate. But the House of Representatives and Senate is a little safer for democratic swings. Anyway, there's a period of instability that's going on because the French government is completely unstable. And then you have these centrifugal tendencies that's going on with Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, Austria, all being anti-EU. And when I saw that Austria was coming out taking positions against the European Union, that's when I knew the European Union was dead. And there's a huge fight where Maidans are going on all over the place. Fico has accused Brussels of being involved in Slovakia. Orban is accused that there's a Maidan against Hungary going on, and over the weekend there were extremely large pro-EU demonstrations in the fourth largest city in Serbia, and Vucic, basically accusing them all being steered by outside forces. Same thing that we had going on here in this country prior to the elections. So I think what is most, you know, this U.S. aid thing, and what we're finding out, U.S. aid involved with Maidan financing. It's been covered up a little bit because this is a prima facie, is that what you call it, evidence of America's entanglement in the overthrow of these other governments that did not agree with our fiscal policies. And it was these revolutions financed through U.S. aid. That's probably the most important thing so far, which leaves me to review the situation in the sense that in the United States, you have a Trump administration, which hopefully will change in respect to the deep state. We'll have to see how that's going. But now with the appointees that I was so worried about, having been confirmed, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Kash Patel, the attitude toward Europe may please a lot of MAGA supporters, but does that really solve the problem? Because what is completely lacking is the positive alternative. What the foreign policy of the United States is saying right now is what you're not going to do. Well, what are you going to do? Because I think there's a lot of people who are kind of in the know and follow much more closely than the average American that's getting a kick out of Europe getting kicked in the teeth. But it does not forebode well for the alliance as long as the implication is to de-emphasize Atlantic in favor of moving all that dynamic and energy to the Pacific. That's not necessarily the best answer. It doesn't solve the problem. And the efforts by Rubio to go against China in Latin America are definitely not in the right direction. And everything is going to depend not only on what will happen with the Putin-Trump meeting, which hopefully will take place in the short term, than obviously the even more important meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping. So in this situation, here's the perfect opportunity for the OASIS plan to be pushed forward. But there's a real revolutionary process that's in motion now. And one aspect of the Vance speech is that he basically said that in Europe, the governments are afraid of their own people. I mean, somebody finally came out and said it. The emperor has no clothes. And it took an American. And that for sure is true. The governments are afraid of their people because in general, 20% support and 80% of the various governments that are meeting in Paris right now and are concerned about continuing military aid to the Ukraine if the United States stops it. Those countries have about 20% support of the people. I mean, that's even worse than what Biden had here. And 80% of the people are very distrusting of their government. And obviously in the United States, we have a little different percentage, especially with Trump getting in. But you've got a certain amount of that phenomenon as well. And I think that the idea, I mean, the crisis we're dealing with is not just strategic and military and financial and all these things, but it's fundamental to our cultural well-being. The continued breakdown of the Western culture as was typified by the last 4 years of the Biden administration. And now the steps that are being taken to reverse some of that. You see the protests going on all across the country. Major protests up at the Utah state capitol. And all their little ho, 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 Trump and Musk have to go or something like that. I wouldn't expect everybody to appreciate the tremendous waste of money that Musk has been discovering. I think there's some people who are not going to like it because for some of these people it's their rice bowl and they don't want to lose it. But I get such a kick out of this stuff that I just find it constantly entertaining. And the people who get so upset. So when the European leaders call an emergency meeting of what are we going to do about Trump? And then you see the same thing happening here in this country with, and I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare the outrage and hysteria that's going on in European leaders with the outrage of people here in America who think that we're being a little too nasty and mean with cutting off all of this funding. Well, as I read through the rest of my notes, just the absolute hysteria in Europe over what Hegseth and Vance had to say, but answering at the Kellogg, who I don't think General Kellogg was invited to the meeting that's going on right now in Riyadh. But, and of course he's Trump's special envoy to the Ukraine. I would expect him to be there, but I haven't seen his name mentioned. And when the Munich Security Conference was concerned about the U.S. assuring their audience that Ukraine would be at the table and that Europe would be at the table in Riyadh, Keith Kellogg said this: no, of course the Ukrainians will be at the table. It'd be foolish that they weren't. But when you say at the table, you have to define that. One of the things I'm driving towards is we had a good, remember this has been going on, we were in the third year. One of the things that we have not really got into is specifics, and what does that really look like? We talk a lot about it, and I will criticize, and I know I'm very political when I say this. President Trump inherited this war, and our philosophy is to not continue this war to the death of the last Ukrainian. The intent is to stop this carnage, stop the war, make sure that it's reasonable, that the sovereignty stays intact. We're going to be very specific about that. But when you say sitting at the table, there are two protagonists and one who hopefully will be the intermediary. But we have to get the specifics to get to that point, and Europe was not invited. Now Zelensky's supposed to be there. I wonder what side of the table Zelensky will be sitting on, or if there will be a third side to the table. I think that's that's going to be something very interesting to watch. So Witkoff on Sunday on Fox News about the phase 2 of the hostage release ceasefire deal with Hamas continuing this week in a location to be determined, they said. Witkoff said that he held very productive and constructive phone calls, as I said earlier, with Netanyahu and Al-Thani and Rashad. And he reported his discussion with these leaders in timing of phase 2, the positions of the parties so that we can understand where we stand. We will continue the talks later this week, either in Cairo or Doha. And he said that phase 2 is a little bit more intricate and complicated in terms of how we bring the two sides together on this. Witkoff explained that the second phase of the deal contemplates an end of the war, but it contemplates Hamas not being involved in the government and being gone from Gaza. So we have to square these two things. The deal itself does not stipulate that Hamas will no longer be in power at the end of phase 2, but that both Biden and Trump administration said they would not accept such a result, but phase 2 is absolutely going to begin. So Haaretz reported that Netanyahu was blindsided by Witkoff's comment. And then after, because for the ever since his meeting with Trump 10, 11, 12 days ago, whenever it was, has just been strutting around arrogant and happy, boasting that he got everything he wanted, including, among other things, burying of phase 2 of the ceasefire was suddenly brought back to reality because of this, because phase 2 is still up and running. So after Witkoff's Fox interview, Netanyahu quickly rushed to release 2 press statements 40 minutes apart. According to Haaretz, Netanyahu says the first said that the Security Cabinet will convene to discuss the deal's second phase before any further negotiations are held. But someone in the United States evidently reads Hebrew, because a corrected statement arrived 40 minutes later. And at Witkoff's request, it said the negotiating team is heading to Cairo to discuss the continued implementation of the deal's first phase. But Haaretz finished the article by saying progress is happening. Now, Hamas will not be in Gaza? Hamas, that has limited to some degree the total genocidal destruction of the Palestinian people. I mean, that's like the sheriff leaving town when the bad guys show up. I don't know if that's the best. I don't know if that's the best analogy or not. But anyway, this is the perfect time, again, for the introduction of the Oasis Plan. And how do you get, and this conference that took place with Ramaphosa and what's her name from South Africa, slips my mind at the moment, over really getting excited about the Oasis Plan for Gaza. How do you get Trump to see the Oasis Plan? Now, when Mike Waltz said that talking about the Oasis Plan was the best proposal which that they could make to him, there was an immediate mobilization of the powers behind the Oasis Plan, mainly the Schiller Institute and those that are associated with the Schiller Institute. And so there's a whole mobilization going on right now. President Trump would have a chance if he could step forward and say, okay, there's a better proposal which has come up. And it's the plan to create much more water. Not high-rise buildings and casinos in Gaza, but to create a real basis for peace by providing tons and tons, acres and acres of fresh water, by building canals, by building nuclear power plants for large desalination of the ocean water to irrigate the entire region. Boy, if he were to come out and say something like that, and then show some of the pictures. This is what they've done in the northeast section of Saudi. It's what they've done in the land surrounding Doha. It could be done. I mean, they're doing it. Nuclear-powered desalination. Now, it would be better for the Israelis. It would be better for the Palestinians. It would be better for the neighboring countries, because something like this has never happened, where all the neighbors, all the Arab neighbors, basically come out and oppose what Trump is proposing, which is going on now, the high-rise buildings and casinos. And some of them are very dependent of these countries that are fighting against this, are very dependent on U.S. military aid, on financial aid. But they've all come out, there's not even a dissenting voice in the group. They've all come out and said, no, we can't accept this. We can't accept the removal of the Palestinians and replacing them with high-rise and casinos and golf courses. Because if they would accept that, their governments would not be very stable in the short term, because the injustice that is perceived by everybody who is a thinking human being, especially in the Muslim world, of which there are 1 billion, not going to sit still for this. So I have a lot of hope here. Now, the thing I wanted to pick back up about the Ukraine is that Zelensky, in some of his latest statements, believes that Trump is going to help him get a peace deal through offering Trump Ukraine's strategic minerals. And I mean, offering Putin territory in Kursk, which is already Russian territory, that's occupied by the Ukrainian forces, trading for territory in the East Ukraine that's claimed by Russia. You know, is Zelensky coming out of a mushroom trip when he says this kind of stuff? Who's advising Zelensky on these things? You want to bring America in as a stronger force to protect the Ukraine sovereignty by offering them, America, the strategic minerals that the Russian army is sitting on top of. I think the Zelensky proposal is not going to get off the ground, because the respective strategic minerals are all or most of them are in the territory which is controlled by the Russian army. There's absolutely no reason why Russia would agree to such a plan, because Russia is winning on the battlefield. And all the observers basically are emphatic that the war is lost, and that anybody who's proposing to continue it, and there are some people, just as without any consideration for the plight of the Ukrainians, proposing to continue a useless slaughter which could have ended in March of 2022, 3 years ago. So therefore, if Zelensky is proposing something new which doesn't correspond to the core interests of the Russians, at a point where Russia is clearly militarily winning, Zelensky, you should shut up and go home. And as for a meeting between Putin and Trump, there were some ambiguous statements, excuse me, by President Trump that he may have already met, he may have already talked with Trump behind the scenes. I mean, Putin. And this, it hasn't been confirmed by the Russian spokesperson Peskov. Peskov is kind of in the same position that Caroline Leavitt is in the White House. So it's unclear whether they did have contact by phone or whatever that means. I think they probably did. I think Trump would be very wise to set up a meeting as soon as possible and bypass all the intermediate steps, all the diplomatic hoopla, and sit down and meet with Trump or Putin immediately. Because if this conflict is to be settled, it has to be settled between the United States and Russia, because that's what the war has been about the whole time, the United States fighting Russia. This war would not have lasted, it wouldn't have gone on as long as it did without the constant inflow of weaponry from the United States, and this is what's got the European leaders all upset. They want the war to continue. Heaven knows why. But they want the war to continue. And the only way it can is, Ukraine's out of weaponry. They're out of everything, and they don't even have air cover. So Europe is going to have to step in and do it, if it is to continue. And I think Trump knows that for the most part, even though Keir Starmer says, yeah, I'll put British troops on the ground in Ukraine, that isn't going to fly. That would be enough to get Starmer removed as prime minister. But I hope that Trump is planning on doing something quickly. And by quickly, I mean before the end of the month. And so if Trump can pick up the phone and call Putin and take the short route, Vlad, it's time we sit down and talk. Where would you feel safe? You know, it's like the old mafia bosses when they're getting tired of shooting one another's soldiers to pieces. All right, where's a safe place where we can meet? Now, one of the criticisms that I picked up on the OASIS plan, because they want to use smaller nuclear power plants to create the heat to distill the seawater and create freshwater rivers, which can be done. It's already being done. Places in Africa, places in Saudi Arabia, these things were already being done. The question was, well, if they were to establish these nuclear power plants, number one, what are the seismic zones in this area? Number two, what if Hamas came back in to the power plant and took the fissionable material to make a bomb? Well, the answer is really quite simple to that, because there are, in the mean, technological progresses have been made since 3 Mile Island here in the United States. You can have inherently safe nuclear reactors. You can use the model which has been developed by India on the thorium basis, which cannot be used for weapons. It gets hot enough to create tremendous heat to generate steam, but it doesn't get hot enough to explode. The pebble bed reactor, I think is what it's called. You have models like the pebble bed reactor, which can physically shut down in a moment if there's any malfunctioning. And obviously, there are considerations, but if you want to solve the problem of large-scale amounts of water, you have to have an energy source which is of a very high energy flux density, which is what fissionable material is. And there's a technical side, absolutely, that has to be managed in all of this stuff, but the pebble bed reactor can shut down immediately. You can't do coal-fired. You can't do oil. There's not enough energy in a pound of coal compared to a pound of thorium, which only makes that the obvious, sensible way the direction to go. A couple more things. I think I'm looking at a couple of more things here that I thought Blagojevich, whatever, Trump's pardoning of Blagojevich to the former Illinois governor, whose 14-year sentence commuted after 8 years in prison. And a Democrat, and the reason that he went to prison is pretty obvious. He exposed the role of the Democratic Party in conducting voter fraud and other crimes, backed up by the press. And he defended Trump against the Trump hysteria in 2020. And he said that the Justice Department's fraudulent prosecution and conviction of himself was entirely because he was exposing the crimes of the Democratic Party. So in his press conference after the commutation of his sentence, he said this: "I took on that corrupt Democrat machine, and they brought me to ruin. They destroy you when you take on the system, when you don't play ball. What they did to me on a local scale to a Democratic governor, they are doing to the Republican president, stealing a presidency. This is incredibly dangerous to our democracy and our freedoms. The American people should not stand for this. This is a critical moment in our history. The question is, do you take this lying down, accept the corrupt political establishment which dictates to the people who their leaders are going to be, or will the people rise up and protest peacefully, organize, get active on behalf of the president? Because his cause is much larger. It goes way beyond Donald Trump. It goes we the people, our right to choose our own leaders in fair elections." Then, I've got some stuff here about anti-Semitism. I think I'm going to move on past that. Let's see, the IDF preparing to resume the war in Gaza. Yeah, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. It looks like Hamas might be literally backing down a little bit. Or at least that's what it looks like to me. So, let's see here. According to the latest I have now, according to the Russian spokesperson Peskov, a meeting is set and being prepared between Trump and Putin. The location is not settled for obvious reasons. There's been a lot of talk about it. Trump already said that he wants to restart nuclear arms control. Did you hear that? Well, you probably did. He was making the comment, we have way too many weapons. What are we doing with all of these nuclear weapons? Interesting enough, because he's the one that got us out of the START Treaty. Trump got us out of 3 nuclear arms treaties with Russia during his presidency. I remember Ritter being quite vocal about that. But there's a lot of talk that he wants to start arms negotiation treaties with Russia and China. That was widely reported, much more so by the Chinese media than here. And the Chinese spokesman said that the United States should go ahead by being an example of nuclear disarmament, given the fact that the United States and Russia have the largest nuclear arsenals. The China spokesperson said that way the other countries will follow. And he said he had a plan to settle the Ukraine crisis by giving assurances that giving assurances to Russia that the Ukraine cannot join NATO. In that way, addressing one of the major causes for the war, he said that the Ukraine cannot expect to have the same territory and borders that existed before 2014, and that's essentially what Hegseth said in Munich. This idea of returning Ukraine to its pre-2014 borders, he said, is fantasy. That's not going to happen. And then this Chinese spokesperson said that it was the Biden administration that provoked the conflict. He said he trusts Putin, he believes Putin wants peace, and he wants Russia to get back into the G8. So this is a very welcome break from the previous policy. I mean, if you look at the British media, it's a complete freakout and hysteria saying that Trump sold Ukraine down the river, and that what Trump is doing is just appeasement. And they can't reconcile themselves to it. Obviously, this is striking, the Munich Security Conference, the outcome of that with lightning. The other major crisis, the initial remarks of President Trump regarding Gaza, turning it into a Riviera, reestablishing the Palestinians elsewhere. Again, I think he's playing chess. He says these outrageous things. We're going to take back over the canal. We're going to take over Greenland. We'll pay off all the 56,000 Greenlanders who live there, and they'll take our money so that we can have their country. We're going to annex Canada. These kinds of crazy, I think, are just distracting things to cover up what he's really after. And I honestly believe he wants to see the end of war. I think he has a patriotic bent inside of his system, in his spine. He wants to see the end of war. And because you need a two-state solution for this to happen in the Middle East, and given the devastation of Gaza and the devastation that's going on in the West Bank, you absolutely have to combine it with some kind of an economic development plan. I've talked about that many times before. You can't just go in and stop the conflict. You can't just go in with your 130 D9 cats from Caterpillar and start pushing the rubble away and then load up the D9 cats and go home. You have to have some kind of an economic development plan that comes in behind it. We learned that after World War II. We learned it in Japan. We learned it in Germany. And look what happened to Germany and Japan with the development programs the United States offered after the end of the war. Stop the hunger and the suffering of their citizens, who really were at the mercy of their totalitarian governments. They weren't the ones that were behind the war. So you need a two-state solution. You have to combine it with an economic development plan. When Trump was visited by King Abdullah of Jordan here in Washington, he reiterated his proposal to dislocate the Palestinians, to which Abdullah said, "You're out of your mind." No, he didn't. He didn't say that at all. He didn't counter him. He just sat there quietly. King Abdullah didn't say anything. But after the meeting, he put out a statement that if the United States would attempt to do that, Jordan would declare war on Israel, which is very obvious because 60% of the Jordanians are Palestinians, and it would threaten the destabilization not only of the Kingdom of Jordan, if such policies were accepted. It would be a threat to the stability of every single country in the region, and the other affected countries, especially Egypt, also don't agree with that plan. They rejected it like all their Arab neighbors. And Egypt is now conducting, started yesterday, it's 3 days, this Cairo conference on an alternative plan. The Arab League is there, and Qatar is there, and some representatives from Saudi are there. And it's proposing the reconstruction of Gaza, but with the Palestinians remaining in their homeland. Well, that's a step in the right direction. So, and then the NATO allied security people in the world, or in much of the world, are meeting also for a conference that's going on in Munich. What is it? Saturday was the 15th through I think the last of those meetings. The Munich one is over, just ending. The Paris one I think has another day, and what is coming out of this? Complete disarray. Complete disarray because they're learning that the old order is dying. They're learning that the Atlantic relationship, not just between the UK and the United States, but between the United States and Europe, the whole basis of that relationship is completely changing now. And so there's this big freak out over Trump closing down USAID, which had a budget of 40 to 60 billion per year, apart from the so-called humanitarian aid it was supposed to be supplying. It was the key vehicle for the so-called soft power inside the United States, which in not so nice words meant political destabilizations, manipulations, color revolutions, and the like. And the people who use these tools to maintain their rules-based order are here in our country, are in complete disarray about the fact that that's been cut off. But that's very good. That's a great thing. It encourages me. Then J.D. Vance, in his address to the Munich, I know I keep coming back to this, but he gave the Europeans a lecture in democracy by saying the problem with Europeans is they're afraid of their own voters. And he called them to stop ostracizing the elected oppositions, which are rampant all over Europe now, and which has yet to take shape. But I'm going to finish here before too much longer, because I'm not on the radio at K-Talk. On February 12th, that would be last Wednesday, Stephen Bryan, who has retired from a career at the top of one of America's 10 largest armament makers, near the top of the U.S. Defense Department, and he's been through the revolving door, and now he's retiring from it. He headlined an article, "Europe gasping for air as Trump makes his Ukraine move. No NATO membership for Ukraine and no U.S. troops." And reported in the article not only that Trump has basically fired Keith Kellogg, who has failed appointee to negotiate with Russia about the war in Ukraine, but that Trump has dropped the Kellogg-initiated U.S. starting position for entering into these negotiations with Russia, which Russia refused to accept even as a starting position, because I think somebody finally got to Trump, maybe Douglas McGregor, and gave him a quick lecture on Russia. Maybe that's why I didn't see Kellogg's name listed in the people at Riyadh going on right now. So Trump, a week ago, in a 90-minute phone call conversation with Putin that we know of, said it was extremely productive because Trump now recognizes not only Russia's refusal, eternal refusal to accept Ukraine ever being allowed into NATO, but the Russians would have to be crazy to ever accept such a possibility, like the United States would have to be crazy to accept Soviet missiles in Cuba. And it kind of transformed Trump's view of what's going on. Now, I have a quote here, and I'll probably finish with this because it gives me hope. And I would like my broadcast on the stream this morning to end with some hope. So after his hour-and-a-half conversation with Putin on the phone, he put this at Trump Daily Posts. I just had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. We both reflected on the great history of our nations and the fact that we fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people, and we likewise lost so many. We each talked about the strengths of our respective nations and the great benefit that we will someday have in working together. But first, as we both agreed, we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia and Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We've also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately, and we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of this conversation, something which I will be doing right now. I have asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of the CIA John Ratcliffe, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and Ambassador and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to lead the negotiations, which I feel strongly will be successful. Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president, but it did happen and it must end. No more lives would be lost. I want to thank President Putin for his time and effort with respect to this call and for the release yesterday of Mark Fogel, a wonderful man that I personally greeted last week at the White House. I believe this effort will lead to a successful conclusion, hopefully soon. Well, there are 5 things that Hegseth made regarding this same environment, and it left the European audience there at the Munich Security Conference in shock, gasping for breath. I'm going to summarize what Hegseth said in relation to what President Trump said after his conversation with President Putin, and then I'm going to bring it to an end here. This is a summation of what Hegseth said. And I want you to think of this in contrast to what Blinken has been doing for the last 4 years, or 3 years of the war. What President Biden refused to do with President Putin or Lavrov, and how that led to tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of more deaths because of it. So here's what Hegseth said. Ukraine's membership in NATO is off the table. Ukraine will not be invited to join NATO. The U.S. will not send any troops to Ukraine for any reason, including peacekeeping. The U.S. will no longer supply or pay for weapons and support for Ukraine. It will be up to the European NATO members to provide support to the Ukraine. While the U.S. supports NATO, American participation has to be fair and equitable, meaning that NATO members will have to significantly increase their contributions. And 5, Ukraine will not be able to go back to the borders it had before 2014. meaning the U.S. expects important territorial concessions from the Ukraine. This gives me hope. This gives me a lot of hope for the future of Ukraine, for Russia, for the United States, for China, for the Middle East, and that I think there very well may have been a divine reason why that bullet hit his ear and not his brain in Butler, Pennsylvania. Now, I don't agree with everything Trump is doing or he has said, but he's a street thug, as he's proven in his real estate days in New York. And he's a showman, as he is shown on The Apprentice, and when he gets up in front of a bunch of people. But I think in his heart of hearts, he wants to see the end of war. And he doesn't want his grandsons fighting the Russians or the Chinese any more than I want my grandsons or granddaughters fighting the Chinese or the Russians or a Muslim country or anything else. So that, for Global Affairs Unfiltered, I am Jack Stockwell. And now it's time to get to my real life and take care of some people who need my attention. I will be back tomorrow on Breaking Health Barriers, the health program, but still coming through the stream. Thank you for your attention. Please like, whatever you call it, review, whatever, share, whatever, this webpage so that we can reach more people with common sense